In the unforgiving depths of the Burma campaign in late 1943, British and Commonwealth forces faced not only the Imperial Japanese Army, but also a far more insidious enemy: starvation, disease, and the crushing weight of impossible logistics. The very jungle itself seemed to conspire against them, turning every supply route into a muddy, malaria-ridden hell. It was an environment where a hot, nourishing meal was not merely a comfort, but a strategic weapon, yet one constantly denied to the forgotten army. Ironically, the solution to this monumental crisis would not come from a general's brilliant tactic or a soldier's heroic charge, but from the meticulous hands of a British chef with an outlandish idea, working hundreds of miles away in a sterile London laboratory. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how a revolutionary method of food preservation, born from desperation and driven by ingenuity, transformed the fate of 100,000 soldiers and reshaped the very nature of warfare in Southeast Asia. The oppressive humidity of the Arakan front in Burma clung to Sergeant Major Thomas Atkins like a shroud, perpetually dampening his uniform and spirits. Every morning, the ritual was the same: a tin of bully beef, hard biscuits, and lukewarm water, if they were lucky enough to have it. Dysentery was rampant, malaria a constant companion, and the debilitating effects of malnutrition hollowed out the men's resolve faster than any enemy bullet. Atkins had seen men fall not from combat, but from sheer exhaustion and disease, their bodies simply giving up under the dual assault of the jungle and inadequate sustenance. Supply lines stretching precariously from India across treacherous terrain or through dangerous air corridors were perpetually choked. The monsoon season, an annual deluge of biblical proportions, transformed already impassable tracks into rivers of mud, stranding forward units and isolating entire divisions. General Sir William Slim, commander of the 14th Army, understood this grim reality better than anyone. He knew that an army, however brave, fought on its stomach, and his army's stomach was perpetually empty, gnawing at morale and efficacy. The Japanese, though facing their own logistical nightmares, seemed to thrive on less, their discipline often overcoming sheer physical deprivation. Hundreds of miles away, in the relative safety of a dimly lit high-ceilinged room in Whitehall, Alistair Finch, a civilian chef with a quiet demeanor but a fiery ambition, observed the flickering images of newsreels from Burma. He wasn't a soldier nor a strategist, but a master of flavors, textures, and the delicate alchemy of sustenance. His usual domain was the stately kitchens of London's elite, where he crafted elaborate banquets. Now he was tasked with developing new rations for the Ministry of Food, a task he found deeply unsatisfying. The standard fare, tins of preserved meat, dehydrated vegetables that reconstituted into unappetizing mush, hardtack biscuits, was an insult to the art of food, and more importantly, an insufficient fuel for fighting men. Finch believed that soldiers, especially those in extreme conditions, deserved proper nourishment, food that could both sustain their bodies and uplift their spirits. His mind, usually consumed with culinary perfection, was now gripped by a single revolutionary idea: not just to dehydrate ingredients, but to dehydrate entire cooked meals, complete with sauces, proteins, and carbohydrates, in a way that preserved their flavor, texture, and nutritional value upon rehydration. It was a concept considered outlandish, if not impossible, by the military establishment. "Finch, are you suggesting we send these poor chaps in Burma powdered dinners?" Colonel Edward Davies, a stern-faced logistics officer with a disdain for anything unconventional, scoffed during a routine briefing at the ministry. Davies, whose career had been built on strict adherence to established protocols and proven methods, saw Finch's proposals as frivolous distractions. "Our priority is caloric density and shelf life, not gourmet dining in the jungle. A soldier needs energy, not an Epicurean experience." Finch, though intimidated by the colonel's bluster, stood his ground. "Colonel, with all due respect, a soldier needs both. A man starved of palatable food is a man starved of morale. And if we can provide that palatable food in a fraction of the weight, imagine the logistical advantage." Davies merely grunted, folding his arms. "Weight is one thing, taste is another, Every dehydrated marvel we've tested so far has tasted like cardboard if it hasn't spoiled first. The cynicism was palpable, a wall of bureaucracy and tradition standing firmly against innovation. But Finch was not easily deterred. He understood the immense challenge, but also the immense potential. He knew that if he could crack the code, if he could truly create food that fights for the men in Burma, it would be more than just a culinary achievement. It would be a strategic triumph. The jungle's hunger had to be met with something more than tins and biscuits. It needed a revolution, and Alistair Finch was determined to deliver it. His ambition was to transform the very nature of military sustenance, to turn a culinary art into a wartime science, proving that innovation, even in the most unexpected forms, could alter the course of history. The small, cramped laboratory assigned to Alistair Finch was a far cry from the gleaming, spacious kitchens he was accustomed to. It smelled faintly of scorched vegetables, sterile chemicals, and a persistent metallic tang from the rudimentary machinery crammed into its corners. Here, amidst bubbling beakers and clanking vacuum pumps, Finch embarked on what many considered his mad quest. His initial experiments were met with frustration. Traditional dehydration, often just air drying, stripped food of its essential oils, damaged cellular structures, and resulted in a product that, when rehydrated, was a shadow of its former self, tasteless, fibrous, and unappealing. He sought to preserve not just the calories, but the very essence of a meal. This meant tackling complex issues like enzymatic degradation, lipid oxidation, and the loss of volatile flavor compounds. He was aiming for a complete, shelf-stable, and palatable meal, not merely dried ingredients. His early attempts at dehydrating a simple beef stew were a disaster. The rehydrated product was a grey, gritty sludge that tasted faintly of dust and despair. Finch knew he needed more than just culinary skill. He needed scientific expertise. It was then that he encountered Dr. Evelyn Reed, a biochemist from Cambridge, seconded to the Ministry of Food for Nutritional Analysis. Dr. Reed was initially skeptical of Finch's lofty ambitions. "Mr. Finch, the science of food preservation is well established. Your ambition to create a complete dehydrated meal that retains flavor and nutrition is frankly beyond the current capabilities of industrial processes." But, as Finch passionately articulated his vision, demonstrating his meticulous records and describing his precise methodology, a spark of scientific curiosity ignited in Dr. Reed. She recognized not madness, but an unorthodox brilliance. She joined his nascent team, bringing with her a rigorous understanding of molecular degradation and preservation techniques. Her initial contribution focused on pre-treatment, blanching methods to deactivate enzymes, and innovative techniques for flash pasteurization that minimized thermal damage to proteins and vitamins. Together, they experimented with various dehydration methods. Finch built a prototype vacuum chamber, believing that removing air would prevent oxidation and allow water to evaporate at lower temperatures, thus preserving delicate flavor compounds. He also tinkered with controlled heating elements and finely tuned air circulation systems, trying to achieve a rapid, even drying process that would avoid creating a tough, leathery exterior and a moist interior, a common problem with traditional methods. The challenges were immense. Rehydration remained a persistent puzzle. If the food dried too quickly or too slowly, its cellular structure collapsed, preventing it from absorbing water effectively later. Flavor loss was another major hurdle. Many aromatic compounds are volatile and evaporate readily during drying. Dr. Reed suggested introducing micro-encapsulated flavorings and spices after the initial dehydration, a groundbreaking concept that aimed to reintroduce the freshness of taste without subjecting delicate ingredients to the drying process. Their persistence began to yield small, incremental successes. A batch of dehydrated potato and leek soup, when rehydrated, was still a little watery, but the distinct flavors were discernible. A curried lamb mix, although slightly grainy, retained an authentic spice profile. These were not gourmet meals, not yet, but they were a monumental improvement over the unappetizing dried rations currently issued. The team's workspace transformed into a symphony of scientific precision and culinary artistry. Timers buzzed, Thermometers were constantly checked and small samples were meticulously taste-tested, often by Finch himself, who would grimace, then immediately scribble notes on how to improve the texture or adjust the seasoning. Colonel Davies, though still unconvinced, made a rare visit to their lab. He watched, arms crossed, as Finch demonstrated a rehydrated chicken and vegetable stew. Davies poked it with a spoon, sniffed it cautiously, and then, to Finch's surprise, took a small bite. His face remained impassive. "Edible, I suppose," he grunted before fixing Finch with a stern gaze. "But still, it is a long way from feeding 100,000 men, Finch, and your shelf-life claims unproven." Finch, however, was undeterred. He knew the potential, and Dr. Reed's meticulous shelf-life data, showing negligible bacterial growth and nutrient degradation after several months, offered a powerful rebuttal to the Colonel's skepticism. This small incremental progress, though hard-won, was building towards something truly transformative, something that could profoundly impact the desperate situation facing the troops in Burma. Back in Burma, the logistical nightmare intensified with every passing day. The year 1943 was a crucible for the 14th Army, a testament to endurance against overwhelming odds. The Japanese held firm control over much of the territory, forcing the Allies to rely on precarious supply routes over the treacherous Naga Hills or through the limited air corridors, constantly harried by enemy fighters. Malaria and dysentery continued to decimate units, sidelining more men than combat ever did. The men were not just fighting the enemy, they were fighting the jungle itself, and the jungle was winning the supply war. Reports of widespread malnutrition and jungle sores caused by vitamin deficiencies flowed back to headquarters in India, painting a grim picture for General Slim. He knew that without a radical shift in their supply capabilities, any offensive would be short-lived and costly. The standard-issue rations, heavy, bulky, and prone to spoilage in the tropical heat, were simply not fit for purpose in this theatre of war. It was amidst this growing desperation that whispers of Alistair Finch's unorthodox work began to reach the ears of General Slim's staff. Colonel Davies, despite his initial skepticism, had been compelled to include Finch's progress in his regular reports, if only to manage expectations. The reports, initially dismissed as the fanciful musings of a civilian chef, now seemed to offer a sliver of hope. A light, nutritious, and shelf-stable ration would be a game-changer. Slim, known for his pragmatic and innovative approach, was open to any solution that promised to alleviate the suffering of his men and improve their fighting efficiency. He authorized a small budget and a dedicated team for Finch, instructing Colonel Davies to assist in establishing a larger-scale experimental facility. This was Finch's moment, a chance to move beyond the confines of his small London lab and prove his concept in a more industrial setting. Finch and Dr. Reed, along with a small contingent of engineers and food technicians, relocated to a purpose-built facility on the outskirts of Calcutta, India. The heat and dust were a stark contrast to London's grey skies, but the urgency of their mission fueled them. Here, they could scale up their experiments, designing and fabricating larger vacuum dehydrators and more efficient processing lines. The focus shifted from mere preservation to optimizing palatability and nutritional integrity on a mass scale. The rehydration puzzle became their obsession. Dr. Reed discovered that by incorporating a small amount of specific hydrocolloids, natural gums, into the food before dehydration, they could create a microporous structure that allowed water to be rapidly absorbed upon rehydration, restoring much of the original texture. This was a critical breakthrough, moving beyond the gritty mush of earlier attempts. Another key innovation was the strategic inclusion of fats and specific spice blends, carefully formulated by Finch. Fats, notoriously difficult to dehydrate without turning rancid, were now carefully emulsified and then flash dehydrated, or in some cases, added as a stable powdered fat mixture post-drying. Finch's culinary artistry came to the fore here. He understood that flavor was not just about ingredients, but about the balance of sweet, savory, acidic, and spicy notes. His recipes for rehydratable curried lamb, a robust beef stew with root vegetables, and a creamy potato and leek soup were refined through countless iterations. Each ingredient was carefully selected for its dehydration characteristics and nutritional profile. They even developed a simple yet nourishing dehydrated fruit compote, offering a much-needed source of vitamins. A small internal taste test was arranged for a group of officers and medical personnel. Plates of rehydrated rations were presented alongside their tinned counterparts. The difference was stark. While not a five-star meal, Finch's dehydrated dishes were warm, tasted distinctly of their intended flavors, and held their form. Lieutenant Colonel John Sterling, a medical officer, noted, "The texture is surprisingly good. And the flavor, Mr. Finch, is quite remarkable for a preserved food. More importantly, I can see significant caloric and vitamin content. This could make a real difference in preventing deficiency diseases." Colonel Davies, present at the tasting, maintained his poker face, but a flicker of grudging respect crossed his features. "Still a long way from the front, Finch, but I concede it's an improvement." The mixed reactions were enough. The potential was clear. A field trial was greenlit, a small daring experiment that would pit Finch's culinary science against the brutal realities of the Burmese jungle. The fate of countless soldiers, and perhaps the entire campaign, now rested on whether this improbable innovation could survive its ultimate test. The air in the supply depot in Dimapur, India, near the Burma border, was thick with dust and the relentless hum of activity. It was late 1943, and the Allied forces were preparing for their counter-offensive. Alistair Finch and Dr. Evelyn Reed, along with a small technical crew, had arrived to oversee the first field deployment of their revolutionary rations. The pilot dehydration plant, assembled in a series of hastily erected sheds, hummed with the steady rhythm of production. But the conditions were harsh. The oppressive heat threatened to compromise the delicate balance of their drying processes. And the constant humidity was a pervasive enemy, always seeking to reintroduce moisture into their carefully dehydrated foods. Finch, usually so fastidious, was perpetually streaked with grease and sweat, his mind consumed by the meticulous quality control required for every batch. The first recipients of this experimental fare were a Chindit patrol, operating deep behind Japanese lines in the dense malaria-ridden jungles of northern Burma. These men, famous for their long-range penetration tactics, relied entirely on airdrops for resupply, making weight and spoilage critical concerns. Their existing rations were a meager collection of rice, sometimes tinned meat and hard biscuits, barely enough to sustain their arduous patrols. Sergeant Major Thomas Atkins, a grizzled veteran of several such operations, watched with weary cynicism as canvas bags, containing what was described as new lightweight rations, were parachuted into their jungle clearing. His men, emaciated and perpetually tired, grumbled about another scientific experiment. "More powdered rubbish, I expect," he muttered to his patrol leader, Lieutenant Roberts. "They'll tell us it tastes like roast beef and it'll turn out to be dried weeds." The first meal was approached with apprehension. Each Chindit received a vacuum-sealed packet containing a compressed block of what was labeled curried lamb and rice. Instructions were simple: add hot water, stir, and wait 5 minutes. In the heart of the jungle, obtaining hot water was often a challenge in itself, requiring careful fire discipline to avoid detection. But hunger, as always, was a powerful motivator. As the boiling water hit the dehydrated block, a surprising transformation began. The block dissolved and a steaming aromatic stew began to take shape. The men, huddled in their jungle bivouacs, sniffed cautiously. The scent was undeniably of curry, a welcome departure from the metallic tang of tinned food. Lieutenant Roberts tasted his portion first. His eyes widened slightly. "By Jove, Atkins," he said, "it's actually quite good. It tastes like actual curried lamb." Atkins, skeptical but intrigued, took a spoonful. The texture was still not perfect, a little softer than a fresh stew, but the flavor was robust and comforting. It was hot, savory, and filling. More importantly, it was fresh. Over the next few weeks, the Chindit patrol continued to receive these new rations. The impact was slow but discernible. The men found the packets lightweight and easy to carry, reducing the burden on their backs. Unlike tinned food, which often bloated and burst in the tropical heat, these sealed packages proved remarkably resilient against spoilage. Reports from Lieutenant Roberts, noted a reduction in stomach complaints compared to previous patrols and a subtle but definite improvement in the men's energy levels. "The boys are less sluggish," Roberts radioed back. "They're covering ground faster and morale seems to have lifted. A hot meal makes a difference, sir." These initial reports, though anecdotal, were enough to justify further trials. Finch and Reed received the news with cautious optimism. Their mad idea had taken its first crucial steps towards proving its worth. The jungle, the ultimate arbiter of survival, had not rejected it outright. For Sergeant Major Atkins and his men, the rations were not just food. They were a fleeting connection to civilization, a small but vital morale booster in an otherwise brutal existence. The lightweight nature and resilience of the food under the punishing tropical conditions were proving to be a genuine tactical advantage, a silent, unsung weapon against the very elements that had so long plagued the Allied effort in Burma. The path ahead was still long, but the initial unexpected success of Finch's dehydrated meals had opened a new, promising chapter in the logistical battle for Burma. The trickle of positive reports from the Chindit patrols soon became a steady stream. General Slim's headquarters in Barrackpore, India, began to accumulate testimonials that painted a compelling picture. Men were enduring longer patrols, suffering fewer instances of dysentery, and exhibiting improved endurance. Lieutenant Roberts' reports were particularly persuasive, detailing how the lightweight rations allowed his men to carry more ammunition or essential equipment, extending their operational reach and combat effectiveness. The psychological lift of a hot, relatively tasty meal in the midst of the jungle's misery was immeasurable. Slim, ever the astute commander, recognized that this was not just a dietary improvement, but a strategic one. He immediately requested a personal demonstration from Alastair Finch. Finch, accompanied by Dr. Reed, arrived at Slim's headquarters with a portable kitchen setup. Under the watchful eyes of General Slim and his senior staff, Finch meticulously prepared a 3-course meal, using only his dehydrated components. He presented a steaming bowl of rehydrated chicken and vegetable stew, a generous portion of creamy mashed potatoes, and for dessert, a surprisingly fresh-tasting dried fruit compote. The aroma alone was enough to pique the general's interest. Slim, known for his austere tastes, took a cautious spoonful of the stew. He chewed slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Finch," he finally declared, a faint smile touching his lips. "This is not exactly Claridge's, but it is a damn sight better than bully beef and biscuits, and I understand it weighs a mere fraction of our current provisions." His endorsement, understated yet firm, was a monumental victory for Finch and Reed. It was during this demonstration that Dr. Reed chose to reveal a crucial aspect of their innovation, a detail often overshadowed by Finch's culinary prowess. "General, the dehydration process itself is robust, but the true breakthrough, the secret sauce, if you will, lies in a proprietary blend of enzymatic stabilizers and antioxidant compounds that we developed." She explained how these carefully selected biochemical agents, added during a critical stage of processing, prevented the rapid lipid oxidation that typically degraded fats and oils in dried foods, leading to rancidity and flavor loss. They also inhibited the enzymatic browning and nutrient degradation that plagued other methods. "This ensures," Reed concluded, "that the nutritional integrity, and indeed the flavor profile, remains remarkably stable, even after months stored in the tropical heat and humidity of Burma." This revelation was the major plot twist. It was not just improved drying techniques, but a sophisticated biochemical intervention that secured the food's longevity and quality. Colonel Davies, who had been observing with a mixture of awe and professional jealousy, looked genuinely surprised. He had dismissed Finch as a chef, not fully appreciating the scientific rigor underlying the culinary art. Slim's response was immediate and decisive. "Colonel Davies, I want this system scaled up, and I want it done yesterday. We are not just feeding our men, we are arming them. This lightweight, stable food will allow us to extend our operational range, sustain our forward garrisons, and ultimately break the Japanese logistical stranglehold." Davies, now fully converted, snapped a salute. "Yes, sir. I will mobilize every resource. Production will commence at maximum capacity." The strategic implications were profound. An army unburdened by excessive food weight, an army fueled by nutritious, palatable meals, would be an army transformed. Finch, now an acknowledged hero, stood quietly beside Dr. Reed, a rare smile gracing his features. Their tireless work, often dismissed and derided, had finally been recognized for its potential to change the course of the war in one of its most challenging theaters. The order for mass production meant that their innovation was no longer an experiment. It was about to become the lifeline for thousands. The directive from General Slim ignited a logistical firestorm across British India. Colonel Davies, now a fervent evangelist for Finch's system, spearheaded the rapid expansion. 10 new dehydration plants were established, strategically located near major railway lines and airfields across India, from Calcutta to Bombay. Each plant was a hive of activity, quickly designed and equipped with larger versions of Finch's vacuum dehydrators and Dr. Reed's specialized processing units. Initial production targets were ambitious: 5 Dehydration rations per day per plant, quickly scaling to 20 dehydration within 3 months. This required not only engineering prowess, but also a massive organizational effort to source, transport, and process the raw ingredients, meat, vegetables, and spices, from local Indian markets and farms. Local workers, many of them women, were rapidly trained in the meticulous processes of food preparation, dehydration, and packaging, creating a new industrial workforce. The impact on the supply chain for the Burma front was nothing short of revolutionary. Before Finch's rations, a typical C-47 transport plane could carry approximately 3,000 pounds of mixed supplies, much of it bulky tinned food and water. With the new dehydrated meals, the same C-47 could now carry over 9,000 pounds of caloric value, a threefold increase in efficiency. This meant more food per flight, fewer flights needed, and critically, less vulnerability to Japanese air interdiction. The reduction in weight per soldier's daily ration was dramatic, from an average of 5 pounds, including tins and water weight, down to a mere 5 pounds for a full day's nutritionally complete dehydrated meals. This allowed individual soldiers to carry more ammunition, medical supplies, or simply reduce their overall burden, conserving precious energy. Finch's rations, now colloquially known as Finch's feeds or jungle stew, were integrated into the supply lines for a diverse range of units: British infantry, Indian Army Gurkhas, West African Frontier Force battalions, and even Chinese nationalist troops fighting alongside the Allies. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Sergeant Major Thomas Atkins, now assigned to a frontline unit preparing for an offensive in the Arakan, noted the palpable change in his men. Before they'd drag themselves through the day, stomachs rumbling, faces pale. Now, after a hot meal of the jungle stew, they're more alert, stronger, less of the dreaded jungle belly, which means fewer men laid low by dysentery. It's not just food, Lieutenant, it's medicine. The psychological boost was equally significant. A hot, flavorful meal provided a tangible link to home, a moment of comfort and normalcy amidst the brutal reality of jungle warfare. It was a stark contrast to the cold, monotonous tinned food that had so long defined their existence. The logistical infrastructure adapted swiftly. Smaller, more frequent airdrops became feasible, allowing units to receive fresh supplies more regularly, even in isolated forward positions. Storage in the extreme heat and humidity of jungle depots, previously a major challenge for perishable goods, was simplified by the compact, vacuum-sealed packaging of the dehydrated rations. The extended shelf life of up to 6 months, even in tropical conditions, reduced wastage to an unprecedented minimum. Colonel Davies, once the chief skeptic, now briefed his staff with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Gentlemen, Finch's system is not merely improving our soldiers' diet, it is fundamentally altering our tactical capabilities. We can now project power further, sustain our forces longer, and do so with greater efficiency than ever before. This is not just a food revolution, it is a logistical revolution." The forgotten army was no longer forgotten in terms of sustenance. It was being rebuilt, meal by meal, into a fighting force ready to reclaim Burma, thanks to the quiet ingenuity of a chef and a scientist. The transformation was visible in the soldiers' faces, in their increased stamina. and in the growing belief that they could finally outlast and outfight the enemy. Mid-1944 brought the crucible that would ultimately prove the strategic genius of Finch's dehydrated rations, the Japanese Yugo offensive. This was a desperate, all-out assault aimed at invading India, culminating in the epic sieges of Imphal and Kohima. Thousands of British, Indian and Gurkha troops found themselves cut off, surrounded, and fighting for their lives against a numerically superior and fanatical enemy. Supply lines were completely severed, and the garrisons faced the terrifying prospect of being starved into submission. It was here, in the brutal fighting for these two vital strongholds, that Finch's system moved from being merely an advantage to an absolute necessity. The besieged troops relied almost entirely on airdropped supplies, and without the lightweight, compact and highly nutritious dehydrated rations, the garrisons would have quickly succumbed. Airdrop manifests from this period show a dramatic shift. Prior to the Yugo offensive, a significant portion of airlift capacity was dedicated to fresh water, medical supplies, and traditional tinned goods. During the sieges, Finch's jungle stew and other dehydrated meal packets constituted over 70% of the caloric value airdropped into Imphal and Kohima. Each C-47 flight, braving intense anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters, delivered life-sustaining nourishment that would have been impossible with the old heavy rations. With 100 troops engaged in the fierce fighting at Imphal and Kohima, their survival became a testament to the system's efficacy. Medical reports from the besieged areas, though dire in many respects, consistently noted a lower rate of severe malnutrition and deficiency diseases among the troops compared to what would have been expected under such prolonged siege conditions with traditional rations. Sergeant Major Thomas Atkins found himself entrenched at Kohima. Amidst the ferocious battle of the tennis court, a desperate hand-to-hand struggle for a small plot of land that was strategically vital. The Japanese, suffering from their own catastrophic logistical failures, were starving, resorting to eating grass and jungle roots, their fighting spirit waning with every passing day. Atkins, however, with a grim determination, watched as a C-47, nicknamed the Food Fairy, braved enemy fire to drop supplies. One evening, after hours of relentless fighting, a hot, steaming bowl of rehydrated beef and potato stew was distributed. It wasn't a feast, mind you, Atkins would later recount, but it was hot, it was real food, and it kept the gut happy. In that hell, a hot meal felt like Christmas. It reminded us what we were fighting for, that someone remembered we were still alive. This small act of sustenance provided not just calories, but a vital psychological anchor, a brief respite from the horror, reinforcing morale at its lowest ebb. The Japanese High Command, baffled by the unexpected resilience of the Allied troops, failed to comprehend the full extent of the logistical revolution at play. They observed that despite their effective encirclement, the British and Indian forces continued to fight with sustained vigor, showing none of the rapid physical decline that they expected from an army cut off from supplies. This stark contrast in troop condition and fighting capability was a direct consequence of Finch's dehydrated meals. While Japanese soldiers wasted away from starvation and disease, Allied troops, though under immense pressure, maintained a basic level of nutrition and health. Finch, now working almost around the clock at the Calcutta plants, monitored quality control with an unwavering dedication, refining recipes and overseeing distribution, fully aware that the lives of thousands depended on his continued efforts. The Battle of Imphal and Kohima became not just a military victory, but a definitive triumph of logistics and the quiet innovation of a British chef. The Burma campaign finally concluded in 1945, a hard-won victory for the Allied forces, a triumph largely attributed to superior air power, aggressive leadership, and, critically, a logistical system that outmaneuvered and outlasted the Japanese. Alistair Finch's revolutionary dehydration method played an indispensable role, crediting his system with feeding over 100,000 errant troops regularly, dramatically reducing casualties from disease and malnutrition, and significantly improving overall combat effectiveness. The statistics were compelling. Instances of dysentery, scurvy, and beriberi among Allied troops were at historically low levels for a tropical campaign, a stark contrast to the devastating rates suffered by the Japanese. This logistical advantage allowed Slim's 14th Army to maintain relentless pressure, conducting longer offensives and enduring arduous conditions that would have crippled forces relying on traditional supply methods. Yet, as the war concluded, Alastair Finch, the unsung hero, quietly returned to civilian life. His groundbreaking work, so vital to the war effort, was quickly overshadowed by the more dramatic narratives of battles and generals. He resumed his culinary career, albeit with a profound new understanding of food science. His method, however, did not vanish. It was almost immediately adopted and refined by commercial food manufacturers. The principles of rapid, low-temperature vacuum dehydration, coupled with Dr. Reed's enzymatic stabilization, became foundational to the burgeoning convenience food industry. Freeze-dried coffee, instant mashed potatoes, and eventually the lightweight, long-lasting meals consumed by hikers, campers, and astronauts all owed a direct debt to Finch's wartime innovations. Dr. Evelyn Reed, recognized for her critical scientific contributions, continued her research in food biochemistry, dedicating her post-war career to improving public nutrition and food safety, often applying the lessons learned in the Calcutta labs. Years later, a retired Colonel Davies, in a private letter to Finch, reflected on their early encounters. "Finch, I confess I was a stubborn old fool. I saw a chef. I should have seen a visionary. Your powdered dinners did more to win that damn jungle war than many of our big guns. My apologies for my initial skepticism. The men in Burma owe you a debt they can never repay." It was a testament to the profound shift in military thinking that Finch's work had instigated. The war had demonstrated that logistics was indeed the hidden weapon, and that individual ingenuity, even when challenging entrenched bureaucracy, could transform strategy. The unglamorous heroes of warfare often operated behind the scenes, far from the front lines, their contributions unseen but utterly decisive. Alastair Finch, the meticulous chef who dared to dream of delicious, shelf-stable meals in the middle of a war, embodied this truth. His legacy was not in medals or grand monuments, but in the countless lives saved, the battles won, and the transformation of how armies, and indeed the world, understood the power of food. His story reminds us that innovation born from desperation, driven by an unyielding belief in a better way, can alter the course of history in the most unexpected and enduring ways. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.